The cycle of life is something that has time and time again been emphasized in Genshin Impact's world. What's fascinating is that it didn't start with Sumeru, but as far back as 1.0 with the artifact set, the Prayers of Springtime. Eternity is cyclical. And what's fascinating about this concept isn't just that the world of Tevat in universe operates with this notion, but also how the plot from a meta-narrative standpoint solely revolves around these three words. To understand that, we go back to Mondstadt, the city where it all began, and the city doomed to repeat the cycle. Out of all of the cities, Mondstadt always had a different atmosphere to it. It's much livelier, and the characters have a much more relaxed presentation compared to Inazuma, Liyue, and Sumeru. The city is known for its brighter ambience, and you can't help but keep returning to it even when there are other places in the world. But there seems to be a hidden story that's untouched here. Out of all of the nations, Mondstadt is the one we know the least about, given that its Archon quest didn't really dive into the rich history of Mondstadt outside of the Four Winds. Mondstadt has been a very superficial city for a long time, but that's what makes it suspicious, because unlike the other cities, Mondstadt's stories are still unfurling. Almost all of the important arcs in the game have something to do with the City of the Wind, and this is why I believe that in the future, we'll return to Mondstadt, and the cycle will finish with the city being destroyed. But first, let's open this discussion with all of the open plot threads that have yet to be concluded or even addressed in the lore. 1. The connection of Mondstadt to the Goddess of Time Istaroth. The connection of Mondstadt to the Goddess of Time Istaroth is the strongest if you don't consider Enkanomiya. The difference between Enkanomiya and Mondstadt is that Enkanomiya is considered as an ancient civilization outside of the jurisdiction of the Seven, while Mondstadt isn't. Mondstadt containing bygone historical knowledge is important to consider now that time and fate seem to play a larger role in the story of Genshin Impact. Furthermore, the Thousand Winds Temple is a place that has yet to be fully explained even in the lore, simply a shrine of bygone devotion to the joint rulership between Barbados, the god of freedom, and Istaroth, the god of time. The mysterious island that gives us the rare Tevatian lore of Istaroth is also in Mondstadt, so it's important to consider that if Genshin were to really flesh out the concept of time in the future, we need to return to Mondstadt to truly understand the lore of the wind. Venti, as a god, is closely related to Istaroth, being depicted as a thread of the Thousand Winds. If we want to learn more about the grander concepts of fate and time in Genshin's story, then we have to go back to our roots and decode Mondstadt's story carefully above everything else: the Thousand Winds Temple, the mysterious island, and even Venti himself. Number 2. Mondstadt has the strongest lingering connection with the Abyss Order compared to the other nations. We know that Mondstadt became a target of the Abyss Order during the Archon quest, but we also need to consider that Mondstadt has other lingering abyssal connections. First is the Spiral Abyss. While I can definitely see this as being a stylistic choice considering that putting the Spiral Abyss anywhere else, for example in Azuma, would make it story-locked, I don't think putting it in Mondstadt is a coincidence. This is also important to consider when you realize that the depictions of the Cataclysm have a strange resemblance to Mondstadt's mountain ranges and cliffs unlike anything else we've seen in the other nations. While it could be chalked up to the fact that in We Will Be Reunited, the story teaser, this is from Lumine's perspective while she is in Mondstadt, we also need to consider that Raiden A shares the same depiction and the same location of the Khaenri'ah Cataclysm, meaning that this being chosen as the spot isn't a coincidence. Number 3. Now let's talk about the characters. When reading through most of the lore of the Mondstadt's characters, it's fascinating to consider that a lot of them, but certainly not all, actually tie into a plot point or a concept outside of Mondstadt. They have connections deeper than the surface which would be important in the future. For example, Mona's divination opened us to the concept of fate. It is through her stories we began the base that constellations are interpreted alongside fate and that fate itself cannot be reweaved, something that we now understand with the Wanderer's story. Fischl is also a fascinating concept. While Amy herself isn't much of an outlier, it's the story of Princess Fischl that we should understand. I find it fascinating that her opening voice line, "Descend upon this land by the call of fate," mirrors really well with the Traveler twins. Not only is the Traveler considered a descender, the sibling was also, according to Nahida, summoned by the heavens, hence the call of fate. Bennett is another fascinating character if you want to consider what bad luck means in terms of altering fate, and his mysterious origins as a baby born in depths of fire could have connections to a strange windless land. Diluc is a character with ties to the Fatui, while Kaya is a character with ties to Conria, both late-game organizations that will have their own part to play in the future. Lee also has ties to Alice, one of the fewest characters that are known to have the ability to traverse worlds. You can even consider the fact that Lisa warns us about the price of visions, as well as give us a hint into the Sumeru Academia, which proves to be useful in the future patches. But last, and certainly not the least, is Albedo. Number 4. Mondstadt also seems to have the strongest connection to Celestia. Location-wise, the purpose and even lore of this is unknown, but one example is that a Vente's statue has writing at the bottom that depict it being the gateway of Celestia. Not to mention that during the Archon Quest interlude in 1.4, it was Vente's statue that was upside down in the mysterious place that we fight the Abyss Herald. That cannot be a coincidence. What makes Mondstadt a fascinating discussion is Albedo. The fascinating voice line of Albedo's slow demise is one of the few setups of Genshin's endgame, considering that it tackles abyssal corruption, a topic so taboo in the regular Archon quests. Albedo's story of corruption is a slow burn that will definitely span for the years to come, but even Venti knows the dangers of his alchemy. Albedo's correlation with Rhine-Daughter makes him a crucial player in the last few chapters of Genshin, which would deal with the future of the Cataclysm. Albedo's correlation with Rhine-Daughter makes him a crucial player in the last few chapters of Genshin, which would deal with the truth of the Cataclysm and Conria, or at the least, in understanding what truly happened 500 years ago. Rhine-Daughter being an alleged cause of the Cataclysm, and the scarier aspect of Albedo's art of Chemia going berserk within Mondstadt means that the entire city is on a ticking time bomb. Unlike the other abandoned civilizations in Teyvat, Mondstadt's correlation with Dragonspine is much more active considering that Albedo is a very real threat that could potentially absorb or reawaken the corpse of the dragon Durin in Dragonspine, almost similar to the Asyl incident with Tartaglia. And this is why I believe that the Traveler is fated to see a destroyed Mondstadt, or at least a Mondstadt that is jeopardized. We also know that Subject 2, or Albedo's mysterious twin in 2.3, is still roaming around the city, and we have no idea what his final motivations are, if he wishes to destroy Mondstadt or if he's simply here for research of his own accord and interest. If the feats of Teyvat are cyclical, the prospect of the Traveler could very well mirror their siblings, namely, the sight of a nation they cared for solely being burnt and destroyed. I think it's really suspicious that Mondstadt just has a different vibe compared to all the other nations, and how frequently we return to it every year. Especially since we haven't been to Liyue in so long besides 2.7. But that's it for me today. There's a fascinating saying in my country called, "Ang sino man hindi marunong lumingon sa pinanggalingan ay hindi makakarating sa paroroonan." Or in English, those who do not look back to where they came from will never reach their destination. The saying means that those who aren't grateful or remember those who helped them in the past will never make it to their future endeavors. So it's always nice to go back to the roots of lore and the people that the Traveler first met when they came to this world. Nothing too deep, but it's overall just fascinating. Anyway, my name is Aster and thank you for chilling with me. Mondstadt is very suspicious.